Over the last few years, it's become common for films to be so long we have to have the debate on whether we need the return of the intermission at movie theatres. Personally, I'd love to sit through 3 uninterrupted hours of The Batman, but me and my addiction to buying the largest soda available makes this a literal tall order. That being said, some films could dare to be a little bit longer. With some movies, storylines come out of nowhere and really mess with the momentum, and worse yet, engaging plot points can quite similarly wander off into nothing. Endings can be abrupt or unfinished, leaving you wonder if someone made a mistake in the edit. Whatever the case, some films could do with at least an extra 10 or 15 minutes to really help themselves along. I'm Cy for Whatculture.com, and these are 8 films that ended too soon. Number 8. The Grey. 2011's The Grey is a rugged, masculine tale of survival against the elements and a hungry pack of wolves that perhaps promised more than it could truly deliver. The power of the metaphor is great, and it's certainly made abundantly clear that Neeson's John Ottaway facing down the alpha wolf is symbolism for him finally standing up to his problems rather than running away. After all, moments before the face-off, we find out that John's plans to commit suicide in the film's opening spawned from his inability to confront his wife's terminal illnesses. Now death stares him down, he chooses to fight, and credits. The bigger problem is that the film's post-credit scene actually tags on the revelation that he won that fight, albeit at great cost. So, you mean to say that I sat through the whole film, there was a face-off between Liam Neeson and the wolf that wasn't meant to be ambiguous, but most audiences didn't see it? The abrupt ending of The Grey is more in line with its deeper philosophical tones, but is undermined by that very final scene, also cheapened by the fact that sometimes you just want to see a man and a wolf go toe-to-toe. Number 7. World War Z. Even with several extra months to shoot alternate endings and a ballooning budget to prove it, the final cut of Mark Forster's World War Z seems to have decided to do away with an ending altogether. Throughout the story, it becomes suspected that World War Z zombies have zero interest in those with terminal illnesses, so whilst our heroes can't undo the undead infection, they can make it easier to live with. As the film closes out, Brad Pitt's character finds himself facing down a lone zombie and is forced to test this theory by injecting himself with a deadly pathogen. Lucky for him, it works, and the undead eyeing him up for 11sies loses interest and shuffles away. Then, the film just kind of ends. Pitt narrates the standard epilogue voiceover, complete with the stereotypical "this is not the end" line, even though you know it is. Footage shows the next stages of the zombie infestation, similar camouflage drugs produced en masse, folks evacuated from major areas, and some awesome but very brief shots of zombies herded into a football stadium and then destroyed. The problem is that it would have been far more interesting to actually have these play out as plot points, not a rushed, sappy montage. Number 6. Contagion. Now don't get me wrong, Contagion is certainly well directed, well cast and tonally very clever, never sensationalising anything and making every moment feel very real and believable. However, because of its clinical nature, at times it's easy to forget that you're watching a film and not a collection of random scenes from different movies spliced together. Contagion just sort of wanders from one scenario to the next without giving us time to engage with its cast. The film's vast array of characters have their struggles, but they don't really do much except sit by whilst millions die until the CDC suddenly pops out a cure. After that, the movie wraps up in a hurry with next to zero character resolutions. Orontes discovers that Song Feng's village has been given a placebo and races off to do something that we never see. Conspiracy theorist Alan's character is a shockingly real story strand, especially in a post-COVID-19 world, that vanishes after he's thrown in jail since it has no actual effect on any events that affect the rest of the story. Whilst a conceptually interesting film, Contagion falls at the final hurdle by giving so few of its characters meaningful resolutions that could have been achieved with just a slightly longer runtime. Number 5. Cloverfield. Cloverfield really turned up the scope of what a found footage film could be. The movie does a fantastic job of not overexposing the monster raining hell down on Manhattan by showing us too much, instead focusing on iconic New York locations in states of disarray as a group of survivors try to make their escape. In retrospect, Cloverfield could have done with a bit more meat on the bone, and it's the third act that needed that extra substance the most. At the film's jumping off point, protagonist Rob and ex-girlfriend Beth have an argument that sees her leaving a house party before all hell breaks loose. As the film hurtles towards its resolution, Rob is suddenly consumed by the need to run back into Manhattan to save her. It's around this time that Cloverfield loses its momentum. Instead of building up to climactic or memorable scenes of chaos and destruction, as any good disaster movie should, we instead focus on a character who has been mostly seen in the film via bits of old videotape. Nonetheless, Rob Rod pulls Beth from the rubble of her apartment, reuniting with his old flame so that they can die under a bridge together in Central Park sometime later. That's very romantic, but can I see more destruction and mayhem, please? Number 4. Warcraft. As engaging as the story of Durotan and his orc tribe is, Warcraft can't get out of its own way. As the film tries to carry so many different story threads at once, its world building turns the film into one big bloated mess. Instead of concentrating on the orcs' pursuit of a new home, Warcraft tries its damnedest to also tell the story of the formation of the Alliance, the Guardian of Azeroth, and the birth of Thrall. It gets a bit dizzying at times and amounts to a big fat "oh" when the film concludes with nothing more than a big sword fight and then scurries along to show us baby Thrall in the reeds as sequel bait. With some extra time, Warcraft might have stood a chance to deliver at least some semblance of satisfying resolution to its multiple story strands instead of basically asking us to come back and find out next time. It'd be easy to find that time if the film cut down on the number of winks and nods too. The gall that Warcraft has to set itself up for sequels without making sure the first entry could swim rather than sink is ultimately its undoing. Number 3. Broken Flowers. Broken Flowers sees Bill Murray's Don Johnston receiving an anonymous letter declaring that his time as a stud in his youth produced a son that he's never met. The pacing of the film is a little unusual, but all the better for it, as Don visits 4 women he's previously been involved with to see where they ended up. Unsuccessful in finding the truth, Don picks a random man off the street to talk to, clearly now obsessed with finding the answer and looking for it anywhere. When he spooks the kid, Don finds himself standing lonesome in the middle of a road. A VW Beetle rolls past with a man hanging out the passenger window, played by Bill's real-life son Homer, before we cut to black. And that's where it leaves us, quite literally with Don standing at a crossroads. As a Murray comedy drama vehicle, it's almost certainly one of the most underrated, and watching the former playboy Don become obsessed with his search for his son is very endearing. That makes it all the sadder that it stops when things are feeling like they're just getting towards the third act. For some films, the cliffhanger ending is necessary and makes you excited about mulling over the possibilities in your own mind. For Broken Flowers, it's a damp squib that blemishes an otherwise wonderful piece. Number 2. Get Out. Get Out was a bold, strange, oftentimes uncomfortable film that was beautifully shot and featured a stellar cast. What's not to love? In the film's final scenes, Rose ends up bleeding from a gunshot wound with Chris astride choking her. His face falls as a police car pulls up, and he and the audience share a somber moment of knowing exactly what this looks like. Except, surprise, it's Chris's friend Rod who has commandeered a vehicle and found his friend at his most vulnerable moment. It's very odd to end Get Out paying off a joke from the film's side story where Rod's TSA training has caused him to become suspicious of Rose's family. But what happens next? Rose may have been left bleeding out on the road, but are we to believe all of that commotion wouldn't have caught the attention of the Armitage family's neighbourhood? What happens when she tells them her ex-boyfriend burnt down her home and shot her? And if she does die, wouldn't anyone who finds her body also identify that her boyfriend just up and left on the night her whole family died? Chris surely hasn't escaped the reality of the situation, which would have been a better note to end the film on, rather than what's essentially a throwaway gag. Number 1. Jurassic Park 3. When Jurassic Park 3 started production, its script barely had a middle and it didn't have an end. The crew were on location, shooting without knowing what the climax of the film would be, so with that in mind, it's not surprising that the film just peters out without any real resolution. Considering that Jurassic Park 3 is about 30 minutes shorter than its predecessors, it physically feels shorter and more shallow and literally unresolved, as one day production just had to wrap. So, hey, where's my final act? The big bad Spinosaurus, which is seen early in the movie killing a T-Rex, is literally scared away by a little bit of fire, never to be seen again. Following this, the humans give some raptors back their stolen eggs and they bounce off like everything is well. All the threat of the Jurassic menace leaves the film and franchise like air from a particularly squeaky balloon. With a complete script, we could have actually had a memorable conclusion. After all, the original films had iconic endings, the victorious Tyrannosaurus Rex roaring in the destroyed visitor centre, and dinosaurs roaming through Seattle. Jurassic Park 3, by comparison, fades out unceremoniously.